Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Aaron Maté. Good Monday morning, everybody. Thanks for being here with us. Reminder to go to usefulidiotspodcast.com to support the show and get bonus content. And we have a lot to go through.
And reminder to tweet this out, share it on social media, and also like the stream because this will help with the algorithm. And this is important coverage.
Absolutely. And with that, let's hit it.
With MTP, Meet the Press.
This Sunday, Good Sunday morning. Israeli strikes are pounding Gaza City as ground forces close in on Gaza's largest medical complex, Al-Shifa Hospital, which Israel says sits on top of Hamas's main command center. Claims Hamas and Al-Shifa staff deny. Thousands of civilians have been sheltering in the Shifa compound in recent weeks, but many fled Friday after nearby strikes. Still, doctors say it is impossible for everyone to get out, trapped with no electricity or fuel to run generators. Pressure is growing on Israel, which has agreed to short daily pauses in some areas of northern Gaza. On Thursday, President Biden said pauses should have come sooner.
Did you ask for a 3-day pause to Netanyahu?
You know, I've been asking for a pause for a lot more than 3 days. Yes.
First of all, pauses are a total joke. Like, when it comes to international humanitarian law, you need a ceasefire. There's several reasons for that. But one is that pauses are confusing. People will go out thinking that the pause is happening, then the pause is over. Putting aside the moral question, which is that these people shouldn't be forced out of their homes or ethnically cleansed, it's just not really taken seriously by the International Human Rights Committee. And neither are safe zones.
But you can tell that Joe Biden's taking this very seriously.
Exactly.
Because he giggles as he talks about how he's been trying to get a pause for longer. Right. But really, even that, ridiculously insignificant gesture, ultimately, of a pause, he hasn't even been trying for that. Because if he really wanted that, he would condition U.S. military support on Israel doing that, which he hasn't do and he won't do. So basically, when he says he's been trying, he hasn't been trying. And even if he had tried for a pause from the start, it would still be insignificant because exactly what we need is a ceasefire rather than this carpet bombing of the civilian population.
Well, at first I was offended that he was laughing about it because I don't think it's really funny. But then someone wrote in the comments, a pause is a joke. So maybe that's his point.
Yeah, he's laughing with us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's laughing at him. He's laughing at how pathetic a pause is. Obviously.
It's nice to have a president with a sense of humor,
I
guess. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep going.
U.S. comments to date. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Friday that far too many Palestinians have been killed.
I love this line. So if it's far too many Palestinians have been killed, does that mean there's an acceptable amount of Palestinians that can be killed? Like right now, the death toll is, who knows at this point? It's the official toll is probably an undercount because of how many people are buried in the rubble. But when Blinken said this, the toll was over 11,000. So if it was 10,000, would he have said, okay, that's, this is an acceptable amount of Palestinians that have been killed? It gets to 11,000, then he's finally saying, okay, this is far too many. The contempt these people have for Palestinian humanity is just, it's unbelievable. And again, would he have said on October 7th, after the Israelis were killed, far too many Israelis have been killed, and that number is now 1,200, and that atrocity happened in response to and this is the part we can't talk about in corporate media, a multi-decade military occupation that Israel refused to end and was only intensifying. Would Blinken say too many Israelis were killed here by Hamas in response to their military occupation?
I want to know what that number is. It would be helpful to know what that acceptable number is. Just for future reference.
In Tel Aviv, thousands of protesters gathered on Saturday night expressing frustration with the government's response to more than 200 hostages that Hamas and other militant groups captured on October 7th. More than 300,000 people marched in London denouncing the rising civilian death toll in Gaza. But the U.S. has stopped short of calling for a ceasefire, something French President Emmanuel Macron pushed for on Friday while recognizing Israel's right to defend itself.
I think this is the only solution we have, this ceasefire, because it's impossible to explain we want to fight against terrorism by killing innocent people. De facto, today, civilians are bombed. De facto, these babies, these ladies, these old people are bombed and killed. So there is no reason for that and no legitimacy. So we do urge Israel to stop.
Joining me now.
Well, great job, Macron, and this has been pointed out by many people for now supporting something that you were imprisoning people for saying a few weeks ago. Because in France, there's been these really harsh laws trying to basically ban protests for Palestine to stop the mass killings in Palestine. And now Macron, after a couple of weeks of mass killings, the body count piles up. Now he's finally willing to say that there should be a ceasefire. Maybe he should have joined the protesters calling for a ceasefire rather than trying to lock them up. Maybe
it's that magical number, the too many Palestinians have been killed number.
Yeah.
I guess it's lower. Maybe it's lower in France, the threshold, than it is in the United States. But at least he's saying it. I mean, I'm not downplaying what he did before, but more people need to be doing what he's doing.
Well, he obviously sees the protests and he realizes that it's hurting his political prospects. He doesn't care about Palestinian lives, but he's seeing the writing on the wall here that public sentiment is turning against people who support mass murder, as it should. I mean, and look at the protests in London this weekend. I think the organizers said they had about 850,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what the number is, but it was a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's happening everywhere. And this line again, that Israel has the right to defend itself. Well, defend itself from what? If it's October 7th and some militants are attacking civilians, absolutely, you have the right to defend yourself. But in response to that, does that give you the right to then go and carpet bomb a civilian population? No, especially if you're an occupying power that has been occupying the Gaza Strip for decades. In that case, you don't have the right to defend yourself. You have the obligation to end your occupation. That's the only thing Israel has to do, is end its occupation. Just because you get attacked in a guerrilla operation, it doesn't give you the right to go in and just bomb everything.
Right.
It's, and people take that for granted, that this Israel has a right to defend itself. Occupying powers don't actually have that right. If they're being attacked on October 7th, that's one thing. But if before October 7th, for decades, there was an occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, then we can't just forget that is going on. Israel has the obligation to end that occupation, which of course you just can't talk about on TV.
Right. And also, even within, I just think it's important to point out this idea that self-defense requires bombing hospitals. Even if we accept the premise, which I don't, because as always, Israel fails to provide any evidence because they just lie with impunity. But even let's say Hamas were underneath a hospital, that doesn't give you the right to, in the name of self-defense, bomb a hospital. There are laws about proportionality and laws about distinction in human rights law. So I just point that out to make the point that all the people making that claim, they lack credibility. They're either lying or they're ignorant.
Well, speaking of the hospital, let's turn to a clip. This is a doctor with Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, who was speaking to Face the Nation about what's happening at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital.
I understand many of your doctors are working at Al-Shifa hospital, and said 2 infants died due to lack of electricity, the inability to keep incubators on. There are 40 premature babies who need to evacuate. Will the Israeli military help these children evacuate?
So far, we don't have any news about any coordinated action about evacuating at least these neonate patients. And we don't have any news about any proper evacuation. What we see are hundreds of patients that they have underwent surgery very soon and very recently, and now they cannot be just take and walk out of the hospital. And next to them, we have newborn babies that they needed, premature babies that they needed support. They were supposed to be in incubators. No incubator works this moment in Al-Shifa. And actually, Al-Shifa doesn't work. It's not functional anymore.
The Prime Minister of Israel has said there's no reason why we can't just take the patients out of the hospital. What's your response to that?
To evacuate the hospital, you need time. You need weeks. It's not within 24 hours. And we said that several times in the past also, that it takes a lot of good organization to evacuate the hospital. And next to this coordination, it takes also a ceasefire. We have reports that people trying to leave the hospital also have been shot down.
By who?
We had also accidents, snipers. And we don't know what is happening also sometimes inside the hospital in several places where they are bombed. There are airstrikes in the hospitals as well.
Yeah, so what he's describing there are snipers attacking people as they flee these hospitals and also attacking people inside the hospitals as they shelter. And again, there aren't just doctors and patients inside these hospitals. There are thousands of civilians sheltering because they're being bombed in their homes and they have nowhere to go. And when they try to go through these so-called humanitarian corridors that Israel has established, they've been shot and bombed there as well. So this is just unbelievable. I mean, every day you wake up and you look at all the clips on social media and like you can't think this gets any worse, but it just does.
Right.
Israel's depravity knows no bounds. They're just so barbaric. I mean, it's ritual now to when you describe October 7th, Hamas's barbaric attack. That's an understatement to talk about the Israeli attacks that are happening every single day, to call it barbaric. I don't even know what the word is. Genocidal, I guess.
Yeah, it is genocidal.
Is the best thing I can come up for. And yeah, we're supposed to accept this as normal, and we're going to see a whole bunch of normalization of that now from our corporate media overlord. So here is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, speaking to Meet the Press.
And by the way, I just want to say that it's not sufficient what Face the Nation does, but I think Margaret Brennan is the only one who would actually have on a doctor from Doctors Without Borders. Like, they're the closest thing to remotely responsible journalism at this time. And of course, they're not doing enough, and they're still whitewashing and sanitizing. But you know, Margaret Brennan, I think, is better than all the other hosts on this, which is damning all the other hosts with faint praise. But
Prime Minister, as you know, even those in the South say they do not feel safe. French President Emmanuel Macron has said there is, quote, no justification for the ongoing bombing of civilians. All over the world, you've seen protesters who are calling for an end to civilian deaths in Gaza. Can you win this war without global support?
We will win this war, because we have no other choice. There's no life for us. There's no future for us and our neighbors if we allow the axis of terror led by Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas.
So he's now coined a new term. It was the axis of evil. Now it's the axis of terror.
Very original.
Yeah.
And their minions to dominate. We have an alliance for peace on the other side. It includes Israel, the United States, the moderate Arab states, and the rest of the civilized world. Now it's a question, who wins?
Do you want to know what Netanyahu just said about the so-called moderate Arab states? He said, you should all be silent. If you know what's good for you, you should all be silent. He just said that in a speech.
Yeah.
And what he's
like
talking
literally,
about,
Aaron's not hyperbolizing. Like, that's verbatim what he said.
And when he talks about moderate Arab states, he basically means the regimes that are under the U.S. thumb, like Saudi Arabia. That's a moderate state. It's actually, historically, one of the most fundamentalist states in the world when you look at Saudi's human rights record. But because they're supplicants of the U.S., then they get to be called moderate.
Right.
And the extremists are those who don't accept being ruled by U.S. hegemony and its client state, Israel, and who even dare to fight back sometimes. That's what's called the extremists. And that's who Netanyahu is trying to rally against, as he calls himself He's a part of the Alliance for Peace as he's mass murdering thousands of people in Gaza. He is the embodiment of peace. Everybody else is terror.
Yeah, and also just in terms of the fundamentalism that you refer to, there's nothing moderate about it, and there's Wahhabism, which is not a particularly moderate version of Islam. So his words mean nothing.
We have to win. There's confusion in many parts of the world. I have to say, not in the United States. I'm glad to see that the majority of the American people support Israel. They understand that we're fighting the just battle of civilization.
Okay, just a lie. Absolute lie. The majority of Americans support a ceasefire. So that's just, he lies very effortlessly. You got to give him credit for that. He's kind of a seamless liar. So that's one lie. We should look out for some tropes and patterns with him. One is he lies. The other is that he's framing this as a war between civilized people and barbarians. Okay.
Against barbarism. But those who protest for Hamas, you're protesting for sheer evil. There are a lot of misguided people out there who don't know the facts. You're talking to people who deliberately targeted civilians, who raped and murdered women, who beheaded men, who burnt babies alive, who kidnapped little babies and Holocaust survivors, you name it. These are the people that you're supporting. Now, you cannot...
Israel has done oh, go Aaron. No, Israel has done like basically everything he just accused them of doing, except on a much larger scale when it comes to targeting civilians.
Absolutely. And we've already seen that some of the allegations that Israel has made about what happened on October 7th have been lies, like the dozens of beheaded babies, even these rape allegations. I mean, I want to be careful here. I obviously haven't investigated this like in depth, and anything is possible. But from what I understand, I have not seen any evidence of these rape claims. And at minimum, he should be asked to show what his evidence is. But because he's the Israeli government, he can say whatever he wants and get away with it.
War II, the Allies are fighting the Nazis. Okay, Chancellor Kohl of Germany said that Hamas are the new Nazis. So imagine now the Allies are fighting the Nazis. They've invaded France after they were attacked by the Nazis. They go into the cities of Germany. They're obviously the Nazis are fighting.
By the way, you just want to point out this whole time she's saying yeah.
Within civilian.
Sorry,
it's such a stupid analogy for so many reasons. The Nazis were a insane, fanatical state that was bent on hegemony and supremacy, which reminds me a lot of Israel, because they are Jewish supremacists and are willing to inflict mass murder to achieve their ends. And just ask not only the people of Gaza, but also the people of Lebanon, which Israel invaded in the 1980s and killed tens of thousands of people. It's a long history of this. Hamas, whatever you think of them, they're a guerrilla force, a militant force that was founded in occupied territory. All their founders are people who their families have suffered at the hands of Israel when it was founded in 1948 and afterwards from ethnic cleansing and atrocities. And from that oppression, from those atrocities, Hamas was formed, and they're a response to that. And their goal is to end the occupation. That's what their goal is. Now, personally, I don't, in terms of Hamas's tactics on October 7th, personally, I think they made a massive strategic blunder. And I think what they did has been a disaster. That's, history will tell whether or not they served the Palestinian cause for liberation. I don't think they have, but I'd be happy to be proved wrong. But what you can't say is compare them to Nazis,
right,
when really they're choosing to fight an occupation that Israel refused to end. And even when Hamas tried to moderate its position and accept a two-state solution, accept the state within 22% of historic Palestine, Israel refused to even engage with that. So Israel here is the fanatical supremacist regime.
Right. And
that's why any attempt to invoke the memory of the Nazis should be used to compare them to Israel, not to Palestinians.
Right. And it's really disgusting. The side that's committing genocide is obviously Israel. It's not Hamas, regardless of what you think of what they did on October 7th. And in terms of the power that the two, Hamas versus Israel. It's just ridiculous to even suggest that Hamas is like the Nazis. They're also not on a rampage to go to other countries. And the other thing is that if Hamas were like the Nazis and were like ISIS, would they have released 4 people already for humanitarian reasons?
That's a good point. Yeah, Hamas did release 4 captives, and according to multiple reports, this was in the New York Times and the Guardian, there was a deal almost reached to reach dozens more, but that deal was blown up when Israel decided to launch this ground invasion. Apparently, around 50 captives, hostages were going to be freed, but then Israel refused to give Hamas time to gather everybody because it's hard because communications are shut off, and they launched the ground invasion instead. So that's what undermined that deal, which is never talked about. Israel pretends to care about the captives, but yet when you have these reports coming out saying that Israel sabotaged or undermined a deal that was reached to free them, it doesn't get attention.
Right, which should be pretty important. And by the way, in terms of what Schultz says, I don't know if he's right. I forgot to look it up, whether he's even reporting the truth when he says what Schultz compared them to the Nazis. I know he's talked about the Nazis, obviously, but I haven't seen him compare them to Hamas. He may have. But Germany is kind of notorious at this point for making Palestinians pay the price for their crimes during the Holocaust. And they are very repressive. And in fact, they silence Holocaust survivors in Germany who are talking about this.
That's exactly right. Germany has been making Palestinians pay for their own crimes. And so Schultz is the last person with any credibility on this topic whatsoever.
Right.
He's vested in perpetuating a narrative that lets his own country feel better about itself for their crimes, and in the process inflicting new crimes on the Palestinians.
Yeah,
and Schultz is also on the side of Nazis inside of Ukraine. The neo-Nazis that have a sizable influence inside the Ukrainian government, that's who Schultz is arming. So he's the last person to try to speak as a voice of authority when it comes to who are the new Nazis. He's on the side of the current Nazis.
And also, I just lost what I was going to say. So, we talked about this with Yanis. Make sure you check out our interview with Yanis Varoufakis, because he talks about Europe's guilt and how they're taking it out on Palestinians.
Okay, more Netanyahu. Here he is speaking to CNN.
And don't worry, guys. As the tweet for this clip is that Dana Bash pressed Israeli Prime Minister on the hospital situation in Gaza. So let's watch her press him.
Now is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Sir, thank you so much for joining me. Let's start with what's happening at that hospital. Israeli forces have said that they are engaged in intense fighting around Al-Shifa hospital, the largest medical facility in Gaza. I know that you say that the hospital sits on top of a Hamas command and control center, but of course there are also patients, civilians sheltering in that complex getting treatment. So how do you intend to go after Hamas without putting sick and injured civilians in that hospital at more risk than they already are?
Well, we've called to evacuate all the patients from that hospital. And in fact, 100 or so have already been evacuated. I've called for field hospitals. The French president has sent a floating hospital ship. I've asked the Emirates to send a field hospital. They have, and other countries have done the same. I expect the UN.
What a humanitarian. We just heard from that doctor from Doctors Without Borders saying it's impossible to evacuate a hospital within 24 hours. You need weeks to do that. I mean, these are sick patients and thousands of them, and it doesn't just happen overnight. And he's pretending because he asked his allies to send a field hospital.
Right.
Which, by the way, how could it possibly even get into Gaza? Like, where are they going to come in from?
And also, they'll probably bomb them if they are set up, given how they're doing such indiscriminate bombing.
Yeah, and how long does it take to set up a hospital?
Right.
You can't just do it overnight. But he wants to pretend as if, this is totally normal, just to shell a hospital and send snipers there and kill people inside it, as if, and meanwhile calling in a hospital from somewhere else, as if that's going to make any kind of difference.
Right. So disgusting.
To build this, so there's no reason why we just can't take the patients out of there instead of letting Hamas use it as a command center for terrorism, for the rockets that they fire against Israel, for the terror tunnels that they use to kill Israeli civilians.
By the way, they never prove that they're doing that. They just claim it. And again, even if it were true, it would violate international human rights law.
They put out an animation video of the tunnels. So basically some Israeli graphic designers came up with a really great cartoon. So congratulations to them. But a cartoon is not evidence.
Right.
And then they've leaked some stuff. Now there's a new article in the New York Times saying that the Times was shown photos that match entrances to tunnels at the hospital. But all right, where's the verification of that? And the Times has been used to launder fake claims more times than we can count. Most famously or infamously, the Iraq WMD scam.
Right.
So I would take something appearing in the New York Times as almost evidence against whatever the claim is, but regardless, no evidence has been shown. But look, even if it's true, and I have no idea what the truth is, there's something so unjust about this whole conversation, like, because it presumes that Hamas and Israel are two equal parties and that both should be operating according to the normal rules. Israel is a massively armed state, one of the most powerful states in the world, with one of the most powerful militaries in the world with nuclear weapons, and they're the occupying power. Since 1967, they've occupied Gaza. That's the fundamental point. And yes, Hamas and the Palestinians are in the small little ghetto in one of the most densely populated areas of the world. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of these tunnels happen to be under hospitals or civilian infrastructure. It wouldn't surprise me. And I don't think that's like some damning thing. If you're trying to resist an occupation and you build tunnels, Gaza is so densely populated and so small that, yeah, it's probably going to intersect at some points with some hospitals. And again, no matter what the truth is, I don't fault people who are resisting a military occupation for the choices they make in doing that. They have the right to resist. It's Israel that has the obligation to end the occupation. And that just, it's not captured in this conversation about the ethics of targeting a hospital. I mean, the conversation could be, does Israel have the right to be bombing Gaza in the first place? And if they don't, because they're an occupying power, they just have to end the occupation. That's it. Okay. Let's go on.
Watch a little bit more of this.
Okay.
Remember, Donna, let's keep this in focus. Just imagine what would happen if the United States were attacked viciously by 20 9/11s. 20, that's the proportionate number. 50,000 Americans killed, 10,000 Americans held hostage, including babies, elderly, women, children. 10,000 rockets falling on your cities. That's the number of rockets that are falling all the time on our cities, may fall during this interview, in fact, and we'll have to go to a shelter. That's what's happening.
Everyone pray for Netanyahu as he's doing an interview from his bunker. A Palestinian rocket might come within, I don't know, 100 miles. So he'll have to run away to a shelter. Poor guy. As this guy's raining down bombs.
Right. How many 9/11s is it for the Palestinians?
2,000-pound bombs are being made by the U.S., are being rained down on Palestinians in their homes, hospitals, schools. And this guy's talking about how he might have to go in a shelter soon if a Palestinian rocket happens to come within his vicinity. It's so shameless. And yeah, exactly. He invokes 9/11. How many 9/11s is this for Gaza? He's inflicting a terror campaign every single day on these people, and he talks about himself as the victim. And again, if the U.S. was occupying, let's say, Canada, a strip of Canada for decades, subjecting it to a brutal siege, where it even counts the calories of the Canadians that it's overseeing in terms of how much food it will allow in, and Canada resisted. What the U.S. would do is, what we'd want them to do is end their occupation and negotiate a release of prisoners. Israel has thousands of Palestinian prisoners, including women and children, many people held without charge. And so Hamas has been trying to negotiate for their release. That's what we want the U.S. to do, anyone to do, rather than launch a mass murder campaign that's primarily targeting civilians.
So what would America do? It would take all its force and go after these killers. And what if these killers embed themselves in hospitals, in schools, in UN facilities? You do everything in your power to get the civilians out, which is what we're doing. We call them to leave, but you certainly wouldn't give immunity to the terrorists. So we're obviously treading carefully when it comes to hospitals, but we're also not going to give immunity to the terrorists. And so far, even though Hamas has tried to prevent the civilians from leaving, hundreds of thousands have left, sometimes having to go through Hamas gunpoints and gunfire that wants to keep them in harm's way.
Just to be clear, sir.
I mean, everything is a projection. Israel's bombed people as they fled.
Right.
And Israel, he says they've been treading carefully in hospitals. Like, what does it mean to tread carefully when you're destroying whole floors and wings of hospitals and using snipers to attack people?
Yeah, that's like as least as uncautious as you can be. The opposite of treading carefully. Like, you don't actually need to be shooting doctors and patients, which they are. All right, this is let's see her try to push back a little bit, because something telling happens.
Aid, help these civilians who are quite sick and inside these hospitals come out, not just in Al-Shifa, but there are other hospitals where this is happening.
Yes. Yes, we're telling them to leave. And
telling them or helping them?
Helping them by creating safe corridors. So we have designated routes to a safe zone south of Gaza City where there's no fighting. And we're telling them, go ahead, move. And by the way, 70,000 have moved 3 days ago. I think 50,000 moved yesterday. More will move today. We want all the civilians to be removed out of harm's way. And Hamas is doing everything in their power to keep them in harm's way. They put missiles below. Yes, go ahead.
Do you believe that there are hostages below that hospital? Israeli or American hostages?
Well, I'm not going to go into the intelligence picture we have, but you know, this.
So look at how he pauses there and says he's not going to get into it. Obviously, if Hamas is underneath there may be hostages there as well. But they can't say that, because then they'd be admitting to bombing their own hot people, which we know they have already. And I'm sure it's just going to come out that they've done that more. But watch how he pivots. Watch his response to this. Okay, he's asked if there are Israelis underneath these hospitals where they're bombing, because allegedly there are all these Hamas centers under there.
Vicious thing. They take hostages. Imagine a baby is held hostage. Who takes a baby hostage? Yeah, I don't know if you have children down. I'm sure your camera crew hasn't.
Who takes a baby hostage? He does. He's taken tens of thousands of babies hostage by putting them under siege and then now bombarding them and not preventing them and not allowing them to leave. And how about those premature babies in the ward of those hospitals? Some of whom have already died because Israel's cut off the power to their incubators. I mean, this guy's the biggest baby hostage taker in the world, not just hostage taker, but murderer.
Baby killer. Yeah, he's a literal baby killer. And as we're talking, there are probably some of those premature babies are dying because they've been taken off of incubators. And as Aaron said, at least 3 has already done that. 3 have already died. But look at how disgusting and manipulative he is. He won't answer the question. Then he pivots to children. You have children, Dana? I'm sure some of your crew have children. Just such rank, irrelevant manipulation, trying to sound like this moral authority, all in the service of whitewashing his literal killing of babies, premature babies on incubators, like as we speak, not to mention all the babies who have been killed in the bombing. But this operation he's claiming is surgical and precise and sparing civilians. As we speak, there are premature babies who've been removed from incubators because they can't be on them anymore, who are like breathing their last breaths.
Okay, is that enough of this clip?
Yeah.
Of Netanyahu? Okay.
He's so disgusting.
Well, luckily,
note how he just, that's another thing to note with him. He's so disgusting, and he just pivots to trying to make an emotional point that has nothing to do with the question he's being asked.
Well, luckily, Joe Biden's in the White House. And you know that Joe Biden, who's providing Netanyahu with all the weaponry to carry out this campaign, is holding Netanyahu to account, making sure that Israel is adhering strictly to the rules of law. And we're going to see confirmation of that from Jake Sullivan, who is the U.S. National Security Advisor.
Is Israel operating according to the rules of war?
Now, you think if Jake Sullivan believed that Israel is operating to the rules of war, he would just provide a simple answer. Yes. But watch what he says.
Well, Dana, I'm not going to sit here and play judge or jury on that
Oh.
question. What I'm going to do is state the principle of the United States on this issue, which is straightforward. Israel has a right, indeed a responsibility, to defend itself against a terrorist group.
So he's basically admitting that Israel is not playing by the rules of war, and yet we are funding them, legitimizing them, standing with them, and totally complicit in their violation of rules of war.
And the reason why he can't answer the question is because the U.S. has laws saying that we can't arm people
Right.
that are violating international humanitarian law.
The Leahy law.
Yeah, and the U.S. knows that Israel's not following that, and accordingly, when he's asked if Israel is following that, he can't answer the question.
Right.
So that's why he's not going to play judge and jury. So all of a sudden, the U.S. is able to condemn any atrocity that they want to around the world, whether it's committed by Hamas or Russia. All of a sudden, when it's being conducted by their ally, Israel, we're not going to play judge and jury.
Yeah, all of a sudden they have a newfound humility.
Yes.
Who are we to judge?
Yes. So that's Jake Sullivan admitting that Israel is not following international law.
Right.
But yet the weaponry will continue because he says Israel has the right to defend itself,
Right.
which is the stock answer you can give to justify terrorism. I mean, it's a justification for terrorism that because this one thing happened on October 7th, Israel has the right now to commit mass murder. That's what
to
he's saying.
defend themselves from premature babies who they have to kill.
Okay. Well, more from let's see here. More from Jake Sullivan.
Yeah.
The fighting seems very intense in and around Gaza. Doctors Without Borders has called on the Israeli government to, quote, end its unrelenting assault on Gaza's health system. Does the U.S. believe that this is an accurate description of what's happening? Is the U.S. telling Israel not to hit hospitals?
Well, Margaret, without getting into intelligence information, we can just look at the
Again, that's a good buzzword for when they don't want to answer the question. We saw Netanyahu do that. Now he's doing that.
The open source reporting that Hamas is using hospitals as it uses many other civilian facilities for command and control, for weapons storage, to house its fighters. And this is a violation of the laws of war. That being said, Margaret, the United States does not want to see firefights in hospitals where innocent people, patients receiving medical care, are caught in the crossfire. And
what is the firefight even in a hospital? Like, are the premature babies firing back against Israel as it's bombing them and cutting off their fuel and their power to their incubators?
Right. Like, they need to cut them off from incubators, or else those premature babies would pick up the incubators and throw them at Israeli soldiers.
Like this idea that, the hospital is caught in the crossfire. No, actually, they're just being bombed by Israel, the occupying power. That's really what's going on. I mean, I'm sure in some cases you have some Hamas militants.
Yeah, shooting back.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Like you have some fighting, but overall, what this really is, it's a Israeli bombing campaign against hospitals, not just with bombs, but also by cutting off their power and using snipers against people inside. That's what's going on.
Right. So they're okay with the hospitals being bombed. They just don't want any firefights.
There we go.
That's their policy. They have a no firefight policy.
Yes. Bombing, fine. Firefights.
Right. No. Bombing and cutting off, removing from incubators. And it's like you can't even make this stuff up, how evil it is.
Okay. Back to Jake.
We've had active consultations with the Israeli Defense Forces on this, caught in the crossfire. And we've had active consultations with the Israeli Defense Forces on this. In fact, just yesterday, the Israeli Defense Forces themselves said that they, on the record publicly, said that they are looking for ways to be able to ensure the safety and security of individual patients in those hospitals, while they also try to figure out.
Wow, what a huge commitment. Israel said on the record publicly that they're looking for ways, not they're going to commit to, but they're looking for ways to ensure the safety of the patients as they're bombing them. Hopefully, Israel can find this way they're looking for to save patients before they've completely killed everybody. I mean, maybe they'll finally find the way they're looking for to avoid killing patients before they've completely wiped everybody out as their bombing campaign continues. And I mean, this language, like there's active consultations. What that means is Israel and the U.S. are coordinating these attacks. The U.S. is totally read in, and they're not doing anything to stop it. They're consulting, basically. They're consulting in the murder campaign.
But I'm glad they're spitballing. They're looking into it. They're spitballing it.
Yeah,
They're workshopping it. Yeah.
Their sleeves are rolled up.
Yeah.
And all their workshopping is just creative language to continue justifying it. That's all they're actually doing. That's what these meetings are about. Like, how can we continue this mass murder policy, but pretend as if we have some concerns about the civilian toll? That's pretty much what their thinking, their creative thinking comes down to. Okay, well, back to Netanyahu.
Oh my God! Don't worry, guys. Don't worry. We have more Netanyahu. This is important. Why does Israel have such little regard for their own? Not even trying to rescue them. Instead, they blow them up. That's such an important thing. And all these people like Amy Schumer who are calling for giving the hostages back should be up in arms and mad at Israel. But it's not, we know that Israel doesn't care about Palestinian life. That's clear. I mean, it's obvious. But what's kind of interesting is that they don't even care about the Jewish life. They care about their geopolitical goals, which is to ethnically cleanse Gaza.
Mr. Prime Minister, you said Saturday you are opposed to the Palestinian Authority returning to control Gaza after the war, and you say that Israel will control Gaza for as long as is needed. Are you saying that Israel would reoccupy Gaza, and what do you say to those who say there should be an international force that governs Gaza after the war?
Well, I think Gaza has to make sure that it's not a threat to Israel. We said destroy Hamas, and for that, if we want to have peace, we have to destroy Hamas. This is what Israel must do, and this is what Israel will do.
Would you accept an international force, Mr. Prime Minister? Would you accept an international force?
I think that the only force right now that can guarantee that Hamas, that terrorism does not reappear and take over Gaza again, is the Israeli military. So overall military.
So the answer to that, if you'll accept an international force, the answer to that is no.
Responsibility will have to be in Israel. As far as the civilian management of Gaza, we need to see the following two things. Gaza has to be demilitarized and Gaza has to be de-radicalized. And I think so far we haven't seen any Palestinian force, including the Palestinian Authority, that is able to do it.
So it's not going to be Hamas. He doesn't want Hamas, and it's not going to be the Palestinian Authority. And by the way, you know what's really good at radicalizing people? When you're literally bombing the shit out of their civilians and removing their, forcing hospitals to remove premature babies from incubators. So his whole claim about what he's doing is obvious, total dishonesty.
Teach their children to hate Israel. They're not fighting terrorists. They're paying for slay. That is, the more terrorists, Palestinian terrorists murder Jews, the more they get paid. And to this date, 36 days after the...
This is some weird lie that's been circulating. Everybody thinks this like if you kill an Israeli or a Jew around the world, you get some kind of terror bonus. I mean, the real incentive that I can see is the billions of dollars that Israel gets from the U.S. the more Palestinians they kill. Look at Congress now Biden trying to give Israel another $14 billion to murder more people.
Right.
I mean, everything Israel accuses its opponents of doing, it's just a projection.
Yeah. I've seen this thing go around Twitter. Every Zionist accusation is a confession.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like even this recent thing about a baby being thrown into an oven. Apparently that's something that was actually recorded in an oral history by a Palestinian during the Nakba.
Worst savagery perpetrated on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. The Palestinian Authority president refuses to condemn this savagery. So, we need a different authority. We need a different administration.
Who would that be? Who would that be, Mr. Prime Minister? Who would that be?
I think it's too early to say. Kirsten, I think it's too early to say, but I can say one thing. The first task we have to achieve is defeat Hamas. The first task the Allies had to achieve before they could reconstruct Germany was to defeat the Nazis. These, as the German Chancellor said, are the new Nazis. We'll defeat them, and then we'll work to have a demilitarized and a de-radicalized Gaza, which will give hope to these people. I mean, they're living under 16 years of horrendous tyrannical rule of Hamas. We'll liberate them, and we'll liberate ourselves from the from this horror, this scourge of barbarism that plagues not only us. It's not only our war. Kirsten, it's your war too. It's the war of civilization against barbarism. We have to win it, and we will.
That's so touching. It's not just my war, it's your war too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's right. This is our genocide as well.
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen without U.S. support. He's trying to make that into like a touchy-feely thing that we should feel like, I don't know, honored that we get to join him and kill
and
him.
Grateful that they're in the forefront of it. And also what's really touching though is how he's liberating Palestinians.
Yes, that's right. I'm sure he
really
actually believes that. Yeah.
I mean, he's liberated them by cutting off by keeping them in an open air prison. He's liberated them since, Israel's liberated Gaza since 2006.
Okay, we can skip the next clip. I want to go to the one after that. This is Jake Sullivan.
Just know that the next clip is Jake Sullivan totally contradicting what Netanyahu said, because neither of them has any idea of what's coming next. But yeah, let's go.
Okay, all right. So
no, we don't have to.
Let's play it then.
Okay.
I want to zero in on the future, which I know you have talked about from day one, what will happen in Gaza next. And you've pressed the Israeli government on this point. Secretary Blinken has been clear that it's the West Bank and Gaza that need to be under unified control, and the Palestinian Authority likely to govern that. It doesn't sound like the Netanyahu government is on the same page as the Biden administration, because the prime minister said something very different just yesterday.
Well, from our perspective, the way forward, the basic principles of the way forward are straightforward. And this is something that Secretary Blinken laid out publicly this past week. No reoccupation of Gaza, no forcible displacement of the Palestinian people. Gaza can never be used as a base for terrorism in the future, and Gaza's territory should not be reduced. Secretary Blinken also said that ultimately we do want to see the reconnection, the reunification of control between the West Bank and Gaza under Palestinian leadership. The Palestinian Authority is the current leadership on the West Bank. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the Palestinian people to decide their future, who governs them.
There haven't been elections
held
in
support
ages.
A process. Well, that's right, Margaret. There haven't been elections held since the early 2000s. But post-October 7th, we can't go back to the way things were on October 6th. And that goes for ensuring that Hamas cannot represent a continuing threat to Israel. And in fact, Hamas spokespeople.
So note here again, and talking about that we can't go back to the status quo of October 6th, where Hamas is in charge of Gaza. Note that the problem with October 6th was not the brutal Israeli military occupation that had been underway for decades.
Right, of course.
The problem was that the wrong people were in charge of Gaza, where, by the way, there were elections over a decade ago. And rather than let those elections install the government that Palestinians voted for, the U.S. and Israel organized the coup attempt inside Gaza to try to basically undermine Hamas. Hamas preemptively responded to that, and that's why Hamas took over to respond to a coup that the Bush administration had cooked up with Israel. And that's a major reason why we're in the predicament we're in. And after Hamas took power, Israel, with U.S. support, imposed a blockade, a medieval siege. None of that is a problem to Jake Sullivan. That's the status quo there is fine to have people living under occupation and besiegement. The problem was that Hamas was in charge. And now, according to him, it's fine to wipe out an entire population, destroy their homes, destroy hospitals, so we can install leadership that is sufficient for Washington, which is just a recipe, on top of being immoral, illegal, and anti-democratic, all that stuff. It's a recipe just for more resistance and violence forever.
Right. Yeah, good luck with that. So he's basically saying, yeah, we want the PLO there. Let's just play the rest of that clip, because
they want to repeat October 7th again and again until Israel is wiped out, that they want to be in a permanent state of war with Israel. That was on the front page of the New York Times out of the mouth of a Hamas spokesman. So Israel is going to prosecute this campaign against a terrorist group, but we also can't go back to October 6th when it comes to governance. And it will ultimately be up to, or should be up to, the Palestinian people to decide what their future governance looks like, and that should involve a reconnection, as Secretary Blinken has said, of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
So just officially contradicting what Netanyahu said. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Let's go for more Jake Sullivan. and we're gonna have to go through some of these clips quickly because we're running out of time. But President Biden recently came out and said that he didn't believe the Palestinian health ministry in Gaza when it comes to their death toll. He says he doesn't trust it. And that got awkward because it's been known for a long time that the State Department has relied on the Gaza health ministry for death counts and never raised an issue. And now all of a sudden, with this death toll at unprecedented levels, this is the worst massacre by Israel in Gaza to date. All of a sudden now, Joe Biden was somehow casting doubt on it. That's been awkward for the White House to deal with, especially when another senior U.S. official, Barbara Leaf, testifying in Congress where she's under oath, she had to admit that actually they have no reason to doubt the death toll. And in fact, she said it could be an undercount. So that's awkward that you have Joe Biden denying a death toll that everybody else, including inside his administration, admits is actually accurate. And let's see how Jake Sullivan handles this issue.
This past week, a top State Department official testified to Congress that the Gaza Health Ministry's estimates of 11,000 Palestinian dead may in fact be an undercount. Does the White House share that assessment?
We don't have fidelity on the numbers of casualties, fatalities in Gaza. We don't know how many are fighters and how many are innocent civilians. But as I have said before, and as Secretary Blinken has said before, we do know there are thousands of innocent civilians who have been killed in the military operations that began after October 7th. And every loss of life of an innocent person, whether it's Palestinian, Israeli, anyone, is an absolute tragedy. And we grieve for every one of those lives. And we continue.
Look at that sociopathic dead-eyed stare as he says, we grieve for every one of those lives. I don't believe it at all. I don't think he knows how to grieve.
We grieve for every death as we provide the weaponry that causes those deaths, and we block any attempt to end it. That's how Jake Sullivan grieves in his weird, sadistic way. I mean, this is a guy who a decade ago said to Hillary Clinton privately that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. So he acknowledged that the U.S. was on the same side as Al-Qaeda. Then most recently, he said, just like a week before October 7th, he bragged that the Middle East has never been quieter. That's what a genius this guy is. It's pretty incredible he still has a job. But I guess that is his job, to go out and just lie through his teeth like this and say we don't have fidelity to the Palestinian death toll. Yeah, that's right, because it's probably an undercount, because people are still buried under the rubble of buildings that you've helped bomb. Okay, that's enough of Jake's face. Let's go to
sorry about that.
Mark Warner, a Democrat of Virginia, Senator Mark Warner.
Do you see this divide on this issue hurting the president with Democrats?
I think it has a potential to, and that's why I think all of us are urging Israel. Clearly, Israel has the right to defend itself, has the right to take out Hamas. Hamas is holding many of the Palestinians, people using them as shields. But we all saw those images on your show today. They're horrific. So what Israel has to realize, and this is why we've been pushing for these pauses, why we've been pushing to make sure that the settler violence on the West Bank is controlled. This is a battle for hearts and minds for Israel, not just a military battle. And those hearts and minds go across our country. They go across the region. And if there's not more consideration about Palestinian casualties, you could see this already tragic event spill over into violence on the West Bank, coming out of Lebanon, and obviously.
So note how he's framing this, that basically the reason to call for these humanitarian pauses is to help Israel win hearts and minds. So basically all this is crafted for the purposes of PR for Israel's military operation. This isn't about protecting people. It's about winning over hearts and minds. And that's why he says we have to control the violence by settlers on the West Bank. Not end the violence by settlers on the West Bank, but control it so that these fanatical settlers don't go too crazy and therefore engender even more opposition to Israel's occupation and attack on Gaza.
He also says that it has the potential to lead to more violence there. No, it already has led to more violence there. Israel has increased its attacks on people in the West Bank.
Absolutely.
And imprison them. And yeah, I mean, it's really moving that he cares so much about Israel's PR war and optics. But he also, Aaron, he also cares about the Democrats not being punished over this. That's another major motivation for him.
That's right. That's right.
Because all these people are
Making
saying,
it
like,
harder.
Joe Biden's rating of support among Arab Americans has plummeted. And so these people are afraid because some people are saying, I'm not going to go out and vote for this guy. Or like when you're calling for when you're enabling genocide, there's no lesser evil. So I think the Democrats are worried about that.
In America, to maintain our traditional support for Israel.
America is Israel's #1 arms dealer. That's what we do. So does something need to change in terms of this potential aid package that is being debated in the Senate?
Well, I think questions have...
I think Margaret's been watching our show.
It's a really nice way of saying we're arming this fanatical mass murdering army. Should we maybe not do that?
Yeah.
Should we maybe not give them $14 billion to continue carrying out mass murder?
Right.
And that's what he's really asking in an oblique way.
Which you don't hear every day on the mainstream media. To her credit and to our credit, because I think she's been
about
watching
how this aid will be used. I've raised some of those questions privately. We also have to pair that with humanitarian assistance, and that is absolutely critical. We've, again, seen these horrific images. But I also think as we think about this package, we also need to realize, I hear a lot of the Republicans who want to bash Iran, and I get it, all right? The Iranians are bad guys. But they then seem to forget the connection between Iran and Russia.
Bring it
It's
all
all
back.
connected. It's all connected, everybody. I love when these people have these, like, you know, share this effort to paint every single official enemy with like the same brush. And it's like they're having some like mind-blowing epiphany. Like it's all connected. It's all connected. Yeah, it's all connected. And I love how he brags about how he's raised his concerns to Israel privately about how they're conducting this mass murder campaign. I mean, how's that going? How are your private concerns?
Yeah.
How's that going for you? Like, have we seen any impact? Has Israel responded at all? Or are they just carrying out mass murder as normal? Because I haven't seen any change at all in Israel's behavior.
Yeah, I'm sure they're really concerned about what Mark Warner is saying.
Okay, we can skip the next clip. Let's go to Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. But just, you know, the last mention of Iran there, it's important to mention that on top of this horrible atrocity going on in Gaza, you still have this back and forth between the U.S. and Syria and allies of Syria, inside Syria, because the U.S. has military bases inside Syria and Iraq. And there have been all these strikes recently on U.S. military bases inside Syria. And the U.S., meanwhile, has attacked facilities of these militias inside Syria. And no one ever talks about simply, why don't we just withdraw U.S. troops from Syria? Why are we there? We're actually there to steal Syria's oil and wheat. But you can't talk about that. Instead, it's just seen as normal that you have these U.S. troops sitting on Syrian territory, taking fire and then firing back in this ongoing tit for tat, which is just yet another aspect of this whole thing that makes the situation more dangerous. But Mark Warner, again, doesn't care about that. He wants to perpetuate that. Let's go on to Chris Murphy, because we're not just talking about Israel these days. There's also that whole proxy war in Ukraine, which is in trouble, as we've seen from recent reporting. So here's Chris Murphy on that.
About Ukraine and Israel aid passing, do you think it can get done before the end of the year?
It has to get done by the end of the year.
Will it?
I'm going to predict it will. Sometimes, you know, in this business, I've learned that there are moments when you can't fail and you can't necessarily see the path to get there, but you get there. Ukraine is running out of bullets for their guns. Israel desperately needs our support right now. Republicans in the Senate have said that they want there to be some border provisions as part of this package to move forward. Some of us are trying to work hard to meet those Republican concerns. I don't know whether we'll get there, but there are a lot of people of goodwill trying hard to get money for Ukraine, for Israel. By the end of the year, I think it will get done.
And we're fingers crossed, everybody.
Fingers crossed. And Chris Murphy is one of these really morally committed people who opposes a ceasefire, but says the size of civilian casualties have been too high.
Yeah, he called the Palestinian death toll, quote, unsustainable. which suggests that there would be a death toll that would be sustainable.
We got to find out that magic number.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to Michael McCall. He is head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, total neocon. He's in Israel right now, and he is worried about the possibility that Israel won't get all the weapons it needs along with Ukraine.
I want to ask you about what Congress can deliver in terms of aid to Israel. Do you think that the new Speaker of the House has the clout necessary with your caucus to move through a package that includes Israel aid, Ukraine aid, and other national security items?
Our aid to Israel is urgent and times of the essence. We have to deliver this package.
He looks and sounds drunk, by the way.
Now, I know that we have.
I love the phrasing too. We have to deliver this package as if he's like a messenger boy carrying this important parcel to a friend in need. We have to deliver this package. Like, if Israel doesn't get this package that we have to deliver, right, Israel won't be able to murder more babies. We have to go and place this package of weaponry in Israel's hands.
Offsets, and that's fair. But I don't think we can play political games with this to support our ally, because if they fail and we fail, it would have a very bad effect across the Middle East. Into Ukraine, that's vitally important as well. So is Taiwan. And so is the last line of defense, the southern border. So really, if you think about it, all these threats are really tied together. Now, whether we handle it all together or separately with, say, Ukraine and border security, all that has yet to be figured out. The stage 2, if you will, CR that the speaker is trying to implement, I think will actually move the process forward.
I actually really appreciate all these neocons saying that the money to buy weaponry for the U.S. and Ukraine is tied together, because you have, unfortunately, a major segment of the progressive movement inside the U.S., especially in Congress, pretending that by arming this neocon proxy war in Ukraine, that somehow they're on the side of freedom and democracy. And here you have these neocons, Michael McCall, he's not cool, Mitch McConnell, all these people openly saying that all, like, Ukraine and Israel, it's all the same, which is true. They're both U.S. client states. They're both dominated by ultra-nationalists who reject the equality of other people inside their country. In the case of Israel, that's Palestinians. In the case of the Ukrainians, it's the people of the Donbass who they've been shelling for more than 8 years. And in both cases, the U.S. has blocked a diplomatic resolution. In the case of Israel-Palestine, that's a two-state solution. Rather than support that, U.S. has supported Israel's occupation. In the case of Ukraine, U.S. has blocked the Minsk Accords and subsequent efforts to achieve peace. So it's refreshing when neocons like McCall can admit that, yes, these conflicts are tied together, because they are. They're about serving U.S. hegemony. And that should be a wake-up call to all the progressives, including those who are now bravely calling for a ceasefire and bravely opposing Biden on this. Inside the House Democratic Caucus, there are some progressives who took in a great stance, but they're the same ones who joined with people like Michael McCall to support the proxy war in Ukraine. And they really should hear him when he insists that all these are tied together, rather than siding with the same neocons on Ukraine that are now calling for mass murder in Gaza. I really hope they hear that and rethink their position on Ukraine, because they are tied together in that respect. Okay, well, we've come to the end of the show. Should we do one more clip?
Sure. Why not?
Let's do the very last one. This is Congress member Mike Lawler. He is talking here to ABC News about the situation in Gaza.
Coming from the Biden, heard what sounds like frustration coming from the Biden administration about about Israeli actions in terms of protecting civilians in Palestine, in Gaza, and humanitarian pauses. How does the prime minister view this? Does he still feel that he has the full and total support of the Biden administration and the U.S. government?
Yes, and obviously that's the purpose of our delegation trip here, is to show our strong support in a bipartisan fashion for the state of Israel. Just a week and a half ago, we passed a resolution in strong support of Israel and condemning Hamas. What is clear is that Israel is engaged in efforts to provide humanitarian relief. They're out of the northern part of Gaza. But for those calling for a ceasefire, they totally misunderstand the situation here. Hamas is not some organization that is going to abide by a ceasefire. They are hell-bent on eradicating the state of Israel and eliminating the Jewish people.
If you look at the history of this, Norman Finkelstein's done a lot of work on this. For example, read his book, Gaza, an Inquest into Its Martyrdom.
Yeah.
So many times Israel has broken ceasefires with Hamas. For example, 2008, on the election of Barack Obama, which the whole world was focused on. That's when Israel broke a ceasefire with Hamas, and that triggered an ensuing lengthy assault by Israel, in which they killed over 1,000 people, and they ended it right before Obama took office. But that was just one example of Israel breaking a ceasefire. And the reason they were doing that was because, well, there are many reasons. At the time, there was pressure on Israel to have serious talks for a two-state solution, to create a Palestinian state, which Israel doesn't want to do. And Hamas at that point was actually starting to moderate its position and saying we'd accept a two-state solution. So Israel can't tolerate the prospect of a Palestinian state. And that helped explain why they broke the ceasefire then. There are many more examples of that. So what he's saying is ahistorical, and it's just being done to justify killing more Palestinians. But let's keep going with this.
Dealing with rational, reasonable people here. Israel needs to be able to defend itself. Nobody would call on the United States to engage in a ceasefire after September 11th, 2001. And I think it's irresponsible for us to call on Israel to do that when they're trying to defend themselves. The bottom line here is, yes, we need to...
A ceasefire after 9/11. He's implying that the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War were responsible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we would call on the U.S. to have a ceasefire after 9/11 because, this was a terror attack with airplanes hitting buildings, and so it wasn't like, it's not as if on September 12th there were more airplanes hitting the U.S. That's not a war. That's a terror attack. And yes, the answer to a terror attack is not more war. It's to try to get justice for the perpetrators. And there were options for that, by the way. There were, for example, talks between the U.S. and the Taliban to even hand over bin Laden, which the U.S. undermined and refused to do because Rumsfeld said we don't talk to terrorists. And so then we got the Afghanistan war, and we all know how that turned out.
And now the Taliban is back. So
there we go.
So glad that we killed all those people and lost all those people. And that was great. This guy, the idea that the responsible thing was to go into Afghanistan and Iraq, and the irresponsible thing was to call for a ceasefire, is so laughable. And such an irresponsible
humanitarian relief, and we want to avoid civilian casualties. But this 11,000 civilian number that keeps getting repeated by the press is factually wrong. Within that number, thousands of Hamas terrorists have been killed. And obviously, Hamas is using these civilians as human shields. And so the oppressor here, the people that are responsible for the deaths in Gaza, is Hamas.
I mean, on top of how stupid that is, the idea that Hamas is responsible for people who are killed by U.S.-made weapons launched by Israel. He's lying through his teeth. How does he know that thousands of Hamas militants have been killed? The majority of the deaths are civilians. Just look at the list of casualties that have come out. You can just scroll and scroll and scroll. You'll see age 1, age 2, age 3. I mean, it's so many children. Just look
under
at
age 1
numbers. And again, even U.S. intelligence admitted last week that they see the figures as reliable. That was in the Wall Street Journal. So even U.S. intelligence cannot contradict these numbers because they know they're accurate, because that's who gets killed when you carpet bomb a densely packed civilian population, is civilians.
Absolutely disgusting. I hate, I can't stand them. I don't know what to say. It's so infuriating, and it's harder in some ways. Like, this is so hard to watch because unlike with Iraq and Afghanistan, there's like constant stuff in social media, which is helpful for raising awareness, obviously, and makes us, I think, our voices that much more kind of urgent. But it's just a disgusting thing to watch. But I'm glad we're seeing it. We have to see it.
At minimum, we have to at least bear witness. Absolutely. All right. We're going to wrap it there. Katie, anything you want to plug for this week? Are you doing the Katie Halper show?
Yes, doing the Katie Halper show. It's going to be great. It's going to be either with Claudia, who's running for PSL.
Claudia de la Cruz,
Claudia de la Cruz, who's running for president. Or an Orthodox rabbi, a member of the Orthodox community who has a very interesting history of Zionism. It's definitely going to be related to Israel-Palestine. That's at 7 p.m. on the Katie Halper show. And I interviewed Craig McIver, by the way, who was the UN official and human rights lawyer who stepped down, who resigned over the UN's failure to protect Palestinians.
That's at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And I'm doing a special additional stream on the history of the term from the river to the sea. And that's going to be Thursday at 2 p.m. at youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. All right. Yeah. And you guys are going to love our show this week on Useful Idiots.
Yes, you will. UsefulIdiotspodcast.com to support the show and get bonus content. Thanks for tuning in. Have a just stay strong, everybody. We're all in this together.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye.